Money whispers, but new wealth screams. Bradley Hastings was a screamer, a newly minted Silicon Valley billionaire who believed his bank account gave him the right to treat service workers like dirt on his designer shoes. When he publicly humiliated a quiet waitress in one of Aspen's most exclusive restaurants over a misplaced drop of wine, he thought he was just putting a peasant in her place. He didn't know that the woman clearing his plates wasn't relying on tips. He didn't know she was the very apex predator he was scheduled to beg for a bailout the next morning. And he certainly didn't expect to see her step out of a $40 million Sikorsky helicopter, holding the contract that could ruin his life. Aspen, Colorado, in the dead of February, is a playground strictly reserved for the global elite. It is a place where private jets clog the tarmac at Sardi Field, where chinchilla coats are casually draped over the backs of bar stools, and where the air itself seems to smell of cold cash and pine needles. Inside Element 47, the Michelin-starred dining room tucked inside the Little Nell Hotel, the atmosphere was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. Crystal glasses chimed, truffles were shaved with practiced precision, and the soft murmur of conversations involved hedge funds, hostile takeovers, and offshore tax havens. Claire Kensington moved through this world like a ghost, dressed in the crisp, unassuming black uniform of the waitstaff, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, practical bun. She was virtually invisible. To the patrons, she was merely an extension of the cutlery, a functional object designed to bring them their Wagyu ribeyes and clear their oyster shells. None of them looked at her face. If they had, they might have noticed the sharp, assessing intelligence in her grey eyes, or the way she carried herself with a posture that spoke of boardroom posture rather than subservient exhaustion. But Claire was not exhausted, and she was certainly not a waitress by trade. She was the sole heir and acting CEO of Kensington Global, a monolithic private equity firm based in London that quietly controlled supply chains, luxury conglomerates, and real estate portfolios across 3 continents. Her presence in Aspen was not a vacation. It was reconnaissance. Kensington Global had recently acquired a controlling stake in the hospitality group that managed several high-end resorts, including this one. Claire, a firm believer in the philosophy of trust but verify, routinely spent a week working anonymously within her newly acquired assets to see how the management treated the ground-level staff. It was a grueling, humbling exercise, but it gave her the unfiltered truth that spreadsheets and sycophantic regional managers could never provide. Tonight was supposed to be her last shift before returning to her world of private aviation and high-stakes acquisitions. Then, Bradley Hastings walked in. Bradley was the founder and CEO of Hastings Freight, a logistics tech startup that had recently gone public to massive, albeit inflated, fanfare. He was 34, wore a tailored Brunello Cucinelli cashmere sweater that hugged his aggressively gym-sculpted shoulders, and possessed an ego that took up all the oxygen in the room. He was accompanied by a sycophantic entourage of 3 junior executives and 2 women who looked entirely bored by everything except his black Amex. From the moment Bradley sat at table 4, the best booth in the house, overlooking the snow-covered courtyard, he made it his mission to establish dominance over the environment. He snapped his fingers at the sommelier. He complained about the ambient lighting. He sent back a perfectly executed amuse-bouche because it was too pedestrian. Claire was assigned to his table. She approached with a polite, neutral smile. "Good evening. Welcome to Element 47. May I start you off with some sparkling water, or perhaps a cocktail?" Bradley didn't even look up from his phone. "We'll take a bottle of the Chateau Margaux 2015, and make sure it's actually decanted this time. The last time I was here, your idiot bartender practically shook it." "Right away, sir," Claire said smoothly, unfazed by his abrasive tone. She had dealt with men like Bradley Hastings her entire life. In the corporate world, they were the loud, insecure sharks who tried to compensate for their lack of strategic depth with aggression. When Claire returned with the wine, the sommelier had already prepared the decanter. She carefully poured the tasting measure for Bradley. He swirled it aggressively, holding it up to the light, taking a loud, ostentatious sip, and nodding dismissively. "Pour." As Claire moved to pour the wine for one of the junior executives, Bradley suddenly shoved his chair back, striking Claire's hip. The sudden impact threw off her balance. A single, microscopic drop of the dark red wine missed the rim of the glass and landed on the pristine, white linen tablecloth. It was a mistake that happened a dozen times a night in any restaurant. A swift dab of a napkin would erase it. But Bradley Hastings was not looking for a meal. He was looking for an audience. "Are you kidding me?" Bradley's voice boomed, slicing through the low murmur of the dining room. Conversations at neighboring tables abruptly stopped. Heads turned. Claire quickly pulled a clean cloth from her apron. "My apologies, sir. The chair caught me off guard. Let me clear that up for you." "Don't touch it," Bradley snapped, standing up. He loomed over her, his face flushed with sudden, performative rage. "Do you have any idea how much this bottle costs? It's $4,000. That's probably more than you make in 3 months, sweeping floors or whatever it is you do, and you're spilling it like cheap table wine." "Sir, it was a single drop on the tablecloth. Your glass is full, and the wine is perfectly intact." Claire maintained her calm, though a sharp, icy edge crept into her tone. She did not cower. She did not flinch. That lack of submission infuriated Bradley further. "Excuse me, are you talking back to me? I don't pay 5 figures for a dinner to be sassed by the help. Where is your manager?" The dining room had fallen into a dead silence. The wealthy patrons watched the spectacle with a mixture of morbid curiosity and detached amusement. No one intervened. "The manager is in the back," Claire said, her voice eerily calm, her grey eyes locking onto his. "But I assure you, it is unnecessary. The situation is handled." "I decide when it's handled," Bradley spat, stepping closer to her, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "You people are all the same, incompetent, lazy, and completely lacking respect for the people who actually build the economy. Get me the manager. Now." Gerard, the restaurant's general manager, came rushing out of the kitchen doors like a man whose hair was on fire. He was a small, anxious man who survived in Aspen by catering to the whims of the ultra-rich with a level of subservience that bordered on the theatrical. "Mr. Hastings, I am so sorry, I heard a commotion," Gerard panted, wringing his hands as he arrived at table 4. "Gerard," Bradley sneered, gesturing dramatically at Claire. "Your staff is completely incompetent. This girl just spilled a $4,000 Bordeaux like a clumsy child, and then had the audacity to give me attitude when I pointed it out." Gerard looked at the single, dime-sized red spot on the tablecloth, then at Claire. Claire gave Gerard a look that was entirely unreadable to him, but terrifyingly composed. "Claire, what happened?" Gerard asked nervously. "Mr. Hastings pushed his chair back into me as I was pouring," Claire stated factually. "A drop hit the linen. No wine was wasted. No clothing was stained." "She's calling me a liar now?" Bradley threw his hands up, looking at his entourage, who dutifully shook their heads in sympathetic outrage. "Listen to me, Gerard. I bring a lot of money into this town. I bring a lot of money into this hotel. I am not going to sit here and be insulted by a glorified plate carrier. I want her gone. If she is serving in this restaurant, my party is leaving, and I will personally make sure every tech executive in the valley knows that Element 47 is a joke. It was a baseless, pathetic threat, but Gerard's bonus depended on positive reviews and high-rolling regulars. He crumbled instantly. "Mr. Hastings, please, sit down. I assure you, we will rectify this immediately," Gerard pleaded. He turned to Claire, his face pale. "Claire, I'm going to have to ask you to clock out. Go to the back. We will discuss your employment tomorrow." Claire looked at Gerard. She felt a brief flash of pity for him. A middle manager so terrified of a loud voice that he would sacrifice his own staff without a second thought. This was exactly why she did these undercover audits. The culture of the management was rotten. "Are you sure you want to do that, Gerard?" Claire asked softly, her voice carrying a weight that the manager couldn't quite understand. "Just go, Claire," Gerard hissed under his breath. "Don't make this worse." "Well?" Bradley demanded, crossing his arms. "Are you going to stand there all night, or are you going to fetch my fresh glasses?" Claire slowly untied her black apron. She folded it meticulously and placed it on an empty chair. She looked at Bradley Hastings. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw an over-leveraged, desperate man whose company was burning through cash. She knew this because Kensington Global was the anonymous entity Bradley was scheduled to meet with tomorrow. Hastings Freight was facing bankruptcy within 6 months if they didn't secure a massive capital injection. Bradley was here in Aspen, not for a ski trip, but to beg a faceless European conglomerate to save his skin. "Enjoy your wine, Mr. Hastings," Claire said, her tone devoid of any subservience. It was a statement of profound indifference. "I have a feeling it will be the highlight of your week," Bradley scoffed, turning his back on her. "Get out of my sight." Claire walked away, her head held high, leaving the hushed dining room behind. She pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic heat of the kitchen, walked straight past the time clock without punching out, and headed out the back exit into the freezing, crisp Aspen night. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a secure number. It rang once. "Ms. Kensington," a deep voice answered. It was Thomas, her head of security. "Thomas, bring the car around to the loading dock. I'm done here," Claire said, her breath pluming in the icy air. "Understood, ma'am. How was the shift?" "Enlightening," Claire murmured. "Fire Gerard first thing in the morning. Give him a standard severance, but I don't want him managing my properties anymore. He has no spine. Consider it done. And your meeting tomorrow at Sardi Field?" A slow, dangerous smile curved Claire's lips. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Make sure the flight plan is filed. I want to arrive exactly on time. Mr. Hastings is very particular about how things are handled." Back inside the restaurant, Bradley Hastings was holding court, completely oblivious to the machinery of ruin he had just set into motion. He was swirling his replacement glass of Margot, leaning in to speak conspiratorially to his junior executives. "That's how you handle people," Bradley boasted, slicing into his steak. "You can't show weakness. In this world, you either eat or you get eaten. You assert dominance early, and people fall in line." One of the executives nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, Bradley. Speaking of eating, how are you feeling about the Kensington meeting tomorrow? Do we know who they're sending?" Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "Some European suit. Doesn't matter. Kensington Global has endless capital, and they want into the American logistics market. They need our proprietary software. I'm going to walk into that FBO, dictate my terms and walk out with a $500 million valuation. I've got them right where I want them." "They've been very secretive," the other executive pointed out nervously. "No names, just intermediaries. It's unusual for a deal this size." "It's a power play," Bradley said, taking a smug sip of his wine. "They want to seem intimidating, but money..." is money. I know how to play the game better than they do. Tomorrow, we secure the bag, and Hastings Freight becomes untouchable. Cheers." They clinked their glasses, the chiming crystal echoing the false confidence of a man standing on a trapdoor, admiring the rope around his neck. The next afternoon, the sky over Aspen was a brilliant, blinding blue. At the Atlantic Aviation private terminal at Sardi Field, the scent of jet fuel mixed with the crisp mountain air. The terminal was an oasis of quiet luxury, featuring leather armchairs, complimentary espresso bars, and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the snow-dusted runway. Bradley Hastings sat in a private conference room overlooking the tarmac, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Despite his bravado at dinner the night before, the reality of his situation was gnawing at him. Hastings Freight was bleeding. The server costs for their new AI logistics routing were astronomical, and their primary venture capital backers had refused a bridge loan. If Kensington Global walked away from this acquisition, Bradley would be forced to file for Chapter 11 by Friday. His equity would be wiped out. His billionaire status, built entirely on paper valuations, would evaporate. He glanced at his Rolex. 1:55 p.m. The Kensington representatives were supposed to arrive at 2 p.m. "Are we sure they're landing here?" Bradley asked his lead counsel, a tense man named David, who was constantly sweating. The FBO manager confirmed a flight plan for a private helicopter arriving from a private estate in Telluride, David replied, checking his iPad. "Tail number is blocked, but it's registered to a Kensington holding company. They're on time." "Good," Bradley muttered, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. He had dressed to project power, a navy Tom Ford suit, an aggressive red tie. "Remember, let me do the talking. We hold the line at 500 million. We don't act desperate." "Bradley, if they push back—" "They won't," Bradley snapped. "They want the tech." A low, thrumming vibration began to rattle the thick glass of the conference room windows. The sound grew steadily louder, a deep, rhythmic beating of heavy rotor blades cutting through the thin mountain air. Bradley stood up and walked to the window. Descending from the bright Colorado sky was a spectacular piece of machinery. It was a Sikorsky S-76D helicopter, painted in a sleek, intimidating matte, black with 0 identifying logos, only a subtle, dark silver crest on the tail. It looked less like a corporate transport and more like a military black ops vehicle. It hovered gracefully for a moment, kicking up a massive cloud of loose snow from the tarmac, before settling down with heavy, expensive precision exactly on the H, painted 50 yards from the terminal doors. "Showtime," Bradley whispered, a bead of sweat forming at his hairline. He wiped it away quickly. "Let's go greet our saviors." Bradley and his legal team walked out of the conference room and stood by the glass double doors leading out to the tarmac. The rotors of the Sikorsky began to slow down, their deafening roar dropping to a high-pitched whine. The side door of the helicopter slid open. First to step out were 2 men who looked like they had been chiseled out of granite. They wore identical dark suits and earpieces, their eyes scanning the tarmac with professional paranoia. They took their positions on either side of the helicopter door. Bradley straightened his tie. He put on his best, most charismatic Silicon Valley smile, the one he used on the covers of Forbes and Wired. Then, the CEO of Kensington Global stepped out of the helicopter. She wasn't wearing a black polyester waitstaff uniform today. She was dressed in a pristine, tailored Loro Piana cashmere coat over a charcoal grey Tom Ford pantsuit. Her dark hair, which had been pulled back in a severe bun the night before, now cascaded in perfect waves over her shoulders. She wore oversized Prada sunglasses against the glare of the snow, and she carried a slim, black leather portfolio. As she walked across the tarmac toward the terminal, flanked by her security detail, she moved with an aura of absolute, undisputed authority. The wind caught the edge of her coat, but she didn't flinch. She owned the ground she walked on. Bradley's charismatic smile froze on his face. His brain, wired to process complex logistics algorithms, suddenly failed to compute the image in front of him. He blinked rapidly. He stared at the woman's face, the sharp jawline, the composed, icy demeanor. He remembered that face. He had seen it less than 18 hours ago. He had screamed at that face over a drop of wine. "No," Bradley whispered, the color draining from his face so fast he looked slightly green. "No, that's impossible." "What's wrong, Bradley?" David asked, noticing his boss swaying slightly on his feet. The glass doors slid open automatically. The freezing air rushed into the terminal, followed by the quiet click of expensive heels on the polished stone floor. Claire Kensington removed her Prada sunglasses, handing them wordlessly to one of her security men. She stopped 10 feet from Bradley Hastings, her cold grey eyes locked onto his panicked, wide-eyed stare. There was no recognition of an equal in her eyes. There was only the clinical assessment of a predator looking at a wounded animal. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hastings," Claire said. Her voice was exactly the same as it had been the night before, smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of subservience. Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His vocal cords felt paralyzed, the memory of his own voice shouting, "You people are all the same, incompetent, lazy. I want her gone," echoed in his skull like a death knell. "I believe," Claire continued, a faint, razor-sharp smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "we have some business to discuss regarding the future of Hastings Freight. Shall we step into the boardroom?" David, the lawyer, completely oblivious to the dynamic, stepped forward, extending a hand. "You must be the representative from Kensington. I'm David Vance, Chief Counsel for—" "I am not a representative," Claire interrupted smoothly, her eyes never leaving Bradley's face. "I am Claire Kensington, CEO and sole owner of Kensington Global. And yes, Mr. Hastings and I have already met." She tilted her head slightly, the smile vanishing, leaving behind a mask of pure corporate ruthlessness. "Though I assure you," Claire added, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, "today's meeting will be significantly more expensive for him than a bottle of Chateau Margaux." The walk from the sunlit tarmac to the Atlantic Aviation Executive Conference Room felt, to Bradley Hastings, like a march to the gallows. The swagger that had defined his entire adult life, the calculated arrogance that convinced venture capitalists to write 9-figure checks, was evaporating with every step. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The space was a masterpiece of modern corporate design, a long table crafted from a single slab of reclaimed walnut, surrounded by ergonomic Herman Miller chairs, with panoramic windows framing the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. Yet, for Bradley, the room felt like a shrinking cage. Claire Kensington took the seat at the head of the table. She did not ask. She simply assumed the position of absolute authority. Her 2 security personnel flanked the frosted glass doors, standing with their hands clasped in front of them, effectively sealing the room. Bradley stumbled into the chair opposite her, his usually perfect posture collapsing. His chief counsel, David Sterling, took the seat beside him, rapidly unpacking his briefcase with oblivious, nervous energy. Sterling had completely missed the subtext of the encounter on the tarmac, assuming Bradley's pale complexion was merely pre-negotiation jitters. "Miss Kensington, it is a profound honor," Sterling began, sliding a thick, glossy pitch deck across the walnut wood. "We have prepared a comprehensive prospectus detailing Hastings Freight's projected market capture for Q3 and Q4. As you know, our proprietary routing algorithm is currently— "Put the deck away, Mr. Sterling," Claire said softly. She didn't raise her voice, but the command was absolute. She didn't even look at the glossy folder. Sterling froze, his hand hovering over the table. He looked at Bradley for guidance, but his CEO was staring at Claire with the panicked, wide eyes of a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding semi-truck. Claire unclasped her black leather portfolio. She extracted a single, slim manila folder and placed it squarely in front of her. "Let us dispense with the theatre," Claire said, leaning back in her chair and resting her manicured hands on the table. "I am not here to listen to a curated pitch deck filled with inflated EBITDA projections and hypothetical market share. I am intimately aware of the reality of Hastings Freight. I know your burn rate. I know your customer acquisition costs. And I know that as of Tuesday morning, your chief financial officer quietly inquired about restructuring options with Kirkland and Ellis." Bradley flinched violently. That inquiry was supposed to be strictly confidential, protected by airtight non-disclosure agreements. It was the ultimate corporate secret, proof that the company was preparing for the worst. "How do you—" Bradley started, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat, desperately trying to summon the bullish CEO persona that had gotten him this far. "Miss Kensington, Claire, look, about last night at Element 47. I had a long day. I was stressed about this very meeting. If I was curt with you, I apologize. It was out of line." "Curt?" Claire tilted her head, a cold, humorless smile touching her lips. "You berated a service worker over a microscopic drop of wine. You demanded her termination to soothe your own ego. You called her incompetent, lazy, and a glorified plate carrier. That was not stress, Bradley. That was a demonstration of your character, or rather, the profound lack thereof." "It was a mistake," Bradley pleaded, leaning forward, the sweat now visibly shining on his forehead. "I'll call Gerard right now. I'll make sure I'll make sure the staff is compensated. I'll make a donation to a hospitality charity. We can separate the personal from the professional, can't we? We are here to talk about a $500 million valuation that will revolutionize global logistics." Claire slowly opened her manila folder. The silence in the room stretched until it felt brittle enough to snap. "We are not here to talk about a $500 million valuation," Claire stated, her grey eyes locking onto his with terrifying precision. "That number is a fiction, a fairy tale you tell yourself to sleep at night. I spent the last 3 weeks conducting a forensic audit of your operations, long before I decided to observe your character in person." She pulled a sheet of paper from the folder and pushed it across the table with a single manicured finger. "Your proprietary algorithm," Claire continued, her tone clinical and devastating, "is currently racking up $3 million a month in Amazon Web Services server costs, just to function at its current, limited capacity. It is inefficient. You attempted to secure a Series D bridge loan from Benchmark Capital last month to cover the shortfall, and they politely declined. You then went to Andreessen Horowitz, and they didn't even return the call." Sterling, the lawyer, turned completely white. He looked at the paper Claire had slid across the table. It was an exact, line-by-line breakdown of their most closely guarded financial liabilities. "You are out of runway, Bradley," Claire said, delivering the fatal blow with the casual elegance of someone ordering a coffee. "Your company is bleeding cash, your infrastructure is unscalable, and you are exactly 6 days away from defaulting on your payroll. You do not have a $500 million company. You have a burning building, and I am the only fire department in town." Bradley felt the room spinning. The walls were closing in. He had spent the last 2 years faking it, projecting an aura of invincibility, manipulating the tech press to write glowing profiles about his genius. He had bought the Aspen Chalet, the Tom Ford suits, the Chateau Margaux wine, all to maintain the illusion of massive success while the foundation crumbled beneath him. And now, the woman he had humiliated for sport the night before was systematically dissecting his life's work with surgical, merciless precision. "Zoe," Bradley whispered, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to control it. "What are you offering?" Claire watched him for a long moment. She saw the desperation leaking from his pores, the utter collapse of his ego. In her line of work, she had dismantled many arrogant men, but there was a specific, poetic justice to this one that she allowed herself to savor for just a fraction of a second. Kensington Global is prepared to acquire an 80% controlling interest in Hastings Freight, Claire announced, her voice echoing softly in the pristine boardroom. "We will assume all your outstanding debts, clear your AWS liabilities, and inject enough operational capital to stabilize the engineering team." Bradley swallowed hard. 80%. It was a brutal cram down. It would dilute his ownership to a mere fraction, but it would save the company from bankruptcy. And the valuation? $40 million, Claire said. The number hit the table like a live hand grenade. 40? Bradley exploded, jumping to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The sudden movement caused Claire's security detail to instinctively step forward, but Claire raised a single hand, stopping them in their tracks. She remained perfectly still, looking up at Bradley with absolute calm. 40 million? Bradley yelled, the veins bulging in his neck, his fear instantly mutating back into the toxic rage he had displayed at the restaurant. Are you out of your mind? The intellectual property alone is worth double that. You are trying to rob me. This is extortion because your feelings got hurt over a tablecloth. Sit down, Bradley, Claire commanded. The authority in her voice was so dense, so absolute, that Bradley's knees actually buckled slightly. He slowly sank back into his chair, though his chest heaved with heavy, furious breaths. My feelings are entirely irrelevant, Claire said, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. I do not make multi-million-dollar acquisitions based on personal vendettas. I am doing this because 40 million is exactly what your distressed assets are worth in a liquidation scenario. Furthermore, your behavior last night didn't hurt my feelings. It provided me with a crucial data point. She leaned forward, bridging the physical gap between them, her presence overwhelmingly dominant. In private equity, we invest in leadership just as much as we invest in technology, she explained, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Last night, I watched you panic over a minor inconvenience. I watched you shift blame, throw a tantrum, and abuse someone you perceived as powerless. That told me everything I needed to know about your crisis management skills. You are an erratic, emotional liability. You are a narcissist who leads through fear rather than competence. I would never entrust a $500 million valuation to a man with the emotional regulation of a toddler. Bradley's jaw clenched so hard, his teeth ground together audibly. He looked at Sterling, silently begging his lawyer to intervene, to deploy some legal maneuver. But Sterling was staring down at his hands, realizing the battle was over before it had even begun. There is one final condition to the term sheet, Claire added, sliding a thick, professionally bound legal document across the walnut table. Bradley stared at it as if it were coated in poison. What condition? Effective immediately upon signing, you will resign as Chief Executive Officer of Hastings Freight, Claire stated. You will be given a silent, non-voting seat on the board of directors. You will retain your remaining 20% equity. but you will have absolutely zero operational control over the company. You will be barred from the premises, and you will sign a strict non-disparagement agreement." "No," Bradley whispered, shaking his head rapidly. "No, absolutely not. I built this company. It's my name on the door. I will not be sidelined. I'll walk. I'll take my chances in Chapter 11. I'll find another buyer. Goldman Sachs, KKR. Someone will see the value." Claire did not blink. She reached into her folder one last time and pulled out a single, heavily redacted sheet of thick bond paper. She placed it gently on top of the term sheet. "You are welcome to try, Bradley, but you should read this first." Bradley reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the document toward him. It was a notice of debt assignment. The legal jargon blurred together, but two names stood out in bold black ink: Morgan Stanley Venture Lending and Kensington Global Holdings. "What is this?" Bradley asked, his voice barely a breath. "That," Claire said, leaning back and resting her arms on the armrests of her chair, "is the notice that Kensington Global purchased your primary venture debt facility from Morgan Stanley at a premium at 9 o'clock this morning." The silence in the room was absolute. Only the distant, muffled whine of a private jet taking off outside penetrated the glass. "I don't understand," Bradley stammered, his eyes darting wildly. "It means," Sterling interjected, his voice heavy with defeat, "that she is our senior creditor, Bradley. She owns our debt." "Exactly," Claire said, a terrifying, predatory calmness settling over her features. "If you refuse my term sheet and attempt to walk out of that door, I will not wait for you to file for Chapter 11. I will call the debt in immediately. I will foreclose on your assets by tomorrow morning. Your equity will be wiped out to zero. Your proprietary algorithms will belong to Kensington Global, and you will be left with nothing but the clothes on your back and a very expensive lease on a house in Aspen you can no longer afford." She folded her hands on the table, the picture of absolute control. "You thought you were a shark, Bradley. You thought screaming at a waitress made you powerful," Claire said softly, her words carving into him like a scalpel. "But you are playing in an ocean you don't understand. And I am the Leviathan." She pulled a heavy, solid, gold Mont Blanc fountain pen from her jacket pocket and placed it delicately on top of the term sheet. "You have exactly 2 minutes to sign," Claire informed him, glancing at her minimalist watch. "Or I instruct my team to begin foreclosure proceedings. The choice is yours." Bradley Hastings looked at the gold pen. He looked out the window at the sleek, black Sikorsky helicopter waiting on the tarmac, a $40 million monument to the true nature of power. Then he looked at Claire Kensington, the woman he had tried to destroy over a spilled drop of wine. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely hold it steady. The heavy, gold Mont Blanc pen felt as cold as a scalpel in Bradley Hastings' trembling fingers. The boardroom at the Atlantic Aviation Terminal was entirely silent, save for the rhythmic, agonizing sound of his own accelerated heartbeat echoing in his ears. He stared down at the crisp white paper of the term sheet. The signature line seemed to mock him, a gaping chasm demanding he jump and leave his empire behind. He looked up, a desperate, hollow look in his eyes, searching the room for any lifeline. He looked at his chief counsel, David Sterling. Sterling, however, had already shifted his posture. The lawyer was no longer looking at his client. He was looking respectfully at Claire Kensington. In the brutal mathematics of corporate law, Sterling knew exactly who was paying his retainer moving forward. The loyalty of the entourage evaporates the precise moment the capital dries up. "David," Bradley croaked, his voice stripped of all its former booming arrogance. Is there any injunction we can file? A grace period? Sterling adjusted his glasses, refusing to meet Bradley's gaze directly. Bradley, if Miss Kensington calls in the venture debt from Morgan Stanley, the covenants trigger an automatic default. They will seize the intellectual property by tomorrow morning. You will have zero equity, and you will personally face litigation from the minority shareholders for breach of fiduciary duty. Signing this document preserves 20% of your wealth on paper and shields you from personal liability. From a strictly legal standpoint, you have no other viable option. It was the ultimate betrayal, delivered in the sterile, measured tone of a legal professional. Bradley looked back at Claire. She sat perfectly still, her pristine Loro Piana coat draped flawlessly over her shoulders, her grey eyes devoid of malice, pity, or triumph. She was simply a machine executing a flawless, lethal transaction. To her, crushing Bradley Hastings wasn't a revenge plot. It was just a Tuesday. With a ragged exhale that sounded like a sob, Bradley pressed the gold nib to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly. Bradley Thomas Hastings. He signed his name, transferring 80% of his life's work, his title and his dignity, to the woman he had treated like dirt less than 24 hours prior. He pushed the paper across the walnut table. Claire did not snatch it. She didn't smile. She calmly leaned forward, inspected the signature with clinical detachment, and then slid the document into her black leather portfolio. She clicked the clasp shut. The sound echoed in the room like a vault locking permanently. "The transaction is executed," Claire announced smoothly, standing up. The two security contractors at the door immediately straightened. "Mr. Sterling, my legal team from Skadden Arps will be in contact with your office within the hour to facilitate the transition of all board materials and operational access codes. You are to freeze all executive spending accounts immediately." "Understood, Miss Kensington," Sterling replied, practically leaping out of his chair to nod at her. Claire finally turned her attention back to Bradley, who was slumped in his Herman Miller chair, staring at his empty hands. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked into the terminal. The aggressive, gym-sculpted posture had deflated into the slump of a defeated, broken man. "Your corporate access badge, Bradley," Claire said, extending her hand. Bradley blinked. "What? Now? I need to go to the office to clear out my desk. I have personal files, Your personal effects will be boxed up by human resources and shipped to your residence via standard courier," Claire interrupted, her tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "As per the terms you just signed, you are strictly barred from the premises of Hastings Freight, effectively immediately. You are no longer an employee. You are no longer the CEO. You are a silent shareholder. The badge, please." Slowly, with a trembling hand, Bradley reached into his tailored suit pocket, pulled out the sleek, black RFID keycard that granted him absolute access to the empire he had built, and dropped it onto the table. "Thomas," Claire said softly, addressing one of the massive security men at the door, "please escort Mr. Hastings out of the terminal. Ensure he does not attempt to access the private tarmac." "Wait," Bradley said, standing up on shaky legs. His pride made one final, pathetic attempt to assert itself. "You think you can just run my company? You don't know the tech. You don't know the engineers. The culture will collapse without me. You're a private equity vulture. You'll gut it. And that 20% you left me will be worth nothing." Claire paused near the door, looking back at him over her shoulder. For the first time all afternoon, a genuine, albeit chilling, smile touched her lips. "Bradley, I have already secured your lead engineering team. I offered them a 30% salary increase and guaranteed performance bonuses out of the capital I am injecting. They were remarkably eager to sign, especially after I assured them the toxic, fear-based management culture had been surgically removed. She stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a low, piercing register. I don't gut companies, Bradley. I fix them. And the first step to fixing Hastings Freight was removing the rot at the top. I suggest you take a long vacation. Go somewhere quiet. And perhaps, the next time you interact with someone pouring your wine, you will remember that you never truly know who holds the debt. With that, Claire Kensington turned and walked out of the frosted glass doors, the sharp click of her heels echoing down the corridor, followed closely by Sterling and one of the security men. The remaining security contractor, a towering man with a thick neck and cold eyes, stepped up to Bradley. This way, sir. To the public exit. Bradley Hastings, the former billionaire wunderkind of Silicon Valley, was escorted out of the Atlantic Aviation Terminal, not through the private VIP lounge, but through the side door leading to the public parking lot. He stood on the icy, salt-stained asphalt, shivering in his Tom Ford suit, entirely alone. He watched through the chain-link fence as Claire Kensington strode confidently back across the tarmac. The engines of the matte black Sikorsky S-76D screamed to life, the rotors whipping the loose snow into a blinding vortex. She climbed into the luxurious cabin without looking back. Within seconds, the $40 million machine lifted off the ground, banked sharply over the snow-covered peaks of Aspen, and disappeared into the brilliant blue sky, taking his entire world with it. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, only to remember that the luxury SUV service was billed directly to his corporate expense account, an account that was currently frozen by Skadden Arps. Bradley Hastings was stranded in the cold. 6 months is an eternity in the fast-paced ecosystem of Silicon Valley. In 6 months, unicorns are crowned, fortunes are incinerated, and men who were once on the cover of Wired magazine are quietly forgotten. It was a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in late August. Bradley Hastings sat in the corner of a crowded, mid-tier coffee shop in Palo Alto, staring blankly at the screen of his 3-year-old MacBook. The aesthetic of his life had drastically changed. The tailored Brunello Cucinelli cashmere and custom Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a plain, unmarked grey hoodie and generic denim. The Aspen chalet had been liquidated to cover the exorbitant personal debts he had accrued trying to maintain his billionaire lifestyle before the crash. He was currently renting a 2-bedroom apartment in a decidedly unglamorous zip code, driving a leased sedan instead of being chauffeured in a Maybach. His remaining 20% stake in Hastings Freight, now rebranded simply as Kensington Logistics, was locked in a legal trust. While it had substantial theoretical value, he couldn't touch a single dime of it, nor could he leverage it for loans due to the ironclad restrictions Claire Kensington had woven into the buyout contract. He was wealthy on a distant spreadsheet, but practically broke in his day-to-day reality. He clicked on a link a former associate had sent him. It was a feature article on Bloomberg. The Silent Titan, How Claire Kensington Rescued a Failing Tech Darling and Cornered the Global Supply Chain. Bradley gritted his teeth as he scrolled through the article. The piece detailed how Kensington Global had masterfully restructured his former company by migrating the inefficient AWS server architecture to a proprietary European cloud network and replacing the erratic, hostile work culture with streamlined, data-driven management. The company had cut its burn rate by 60% while doubling its output. The previous leadership was fundamentally bottlenecked by ego, an anonymous senior engineer was quoted as saying in the article. Since the Kensington acquisition, we are actually allowed to innovate without fear of public humiliation in the boardroom. Bradley slammed his laptop shut, his knuckles white. The truth was a bitter, jagged pill. Claire hadn't destroyed his company, She had saved it. She had proven that the technology was brilliant, but the man running it was the poison. The non-disparagement agreement he had signed carried a $50 million penalty clause. He couldn't defend himself on Twitter. He couldn't go on a podcast and claim he was robbed. He had been effectively gagged and exiled from the kingdom he built. "Excuse me, sir." Bradley jumped slightly, pulled out of his dark spiral. He looked up. A young woman, wearing the green apron of a barista, was standing next to his small, wobbly table. She was holding a tray with a fresh iced Americano and a blueberry muffin. She looked tired, her hair pulled back into a practical, slightly messy bun, but she wore a polite, neutral smile. "I noticed you've been sitting here for a few hours just drinking water," the barista said softly. "We had an extra pastry from the morning rush that we're about to toss, and I accidentally made an extra Americano. I thought you might want it. No charge." Bradley stared at the simple paper cup and the pastry. He looked at the girl's face. Suddenly, the air rushed out of his lungs. A vivid, horrifying flashback seized his mind. He was back in the dining room of Element 47. He saw the crisp white tablecloth. He saw the single microscopic drop of dark red wine. He heard his own voice, echoing with grotesque entitlement. "That's probably more than you make in 3 months, sweeping floors or whatever it is you do." He looked at the barista in front of him. She was just a person, working a long shift, trying to do a small, decent thing for a stranger who looked miserable. She wasn't an inferior life form. She wasn't a glorified plate carrier. She was a human being, possessing a level of grace and unprompted kindness that Bradley had never once exhibited during his entire tenure as a billionaire. The contrast between this girl's genuine empathy and his own historical cruelty struck him with the force of a physical blow. He realized with crushing clarity that Claire Kensington had not just orchestrated a corporate takeover. She had administered a brutal, karmic re-education. She had stripped away his wealth and his power to reveal the hollow, pathetic nature of the man underneath. He had thought that a 10-figure bank account made him a god among insects. But in the real world, the world where true power moves quietly and character is the ultimate currency, he was the one who was small. Bradley felt a strange, unfamiliar burning sensation behind his eyes. He swallowed hard, forcing down the lump of pure shame that had materialized in his throat. He looked up at the barista. The defensive, arrogant armor he had worn his entire adult life finally cracked, falling away in heavy, useless pieces. "Thank you," Bradley said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all pretense, carrying a genuine humility he had never known before. That is incredibly kind of you. Thank you so much." The barista smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "You're welcome. Have a better day, okay?" She turned and walked back behind the counter to wipe down the espresso machine. Bradley sat in the corner of the coffee shop, unboxed his free pastry, and took a sip of the iced coffee. It wasn't a $4,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux in a Michelin-starred restaurant. It was just coffee. But as he sat there, a dethroned king in a grey hoodie, he realized it was exactly what he deserved. The story of Bradley Hastings and Claire Kensington is a stark reminder of a universal truth. New wealth often relies on noise to validate its existence, while true power operates in total silence. Bradley mistook his temporary financial valuation for a permanent elevation above basic human decency. He believed that abusing a waitress was a harmless exertion of dominance, completely blind to the fact that the universe has a highly efficient way of balancing its ledgers. Claire Kensington didn't destroy him out of petty revenge. She dismantled him, because his character proved he was a terrible investment. The drop of wine spilled at Element 47 didn't ruin his empire. It merely illuminated the fatal cracks in his foundation. Ultimately, Bradley's catastrophic downfall wasn't caused by a predatory private equity firm or a ruthless corporate maneuver. It was caused by his own inability to understand that respect is not a commodity you buy, but a standard you uphold, no matter who is standing on the other side of the table.